I was bustling around with an energy I rarely felt these days, my heart fluttering like a hummingbird's wings. The sweet, comforting aroma of chocolate cake wafted through every nook and cranny of my house, wrapping me in a warm embrace of nostalgia. As the clock ticked away, I anxiously checked the oven, praying that the cake would bake to perfection for my grandson Andrew's arrival. With equal care, I monitored the peppermint tea steeping on the stove, its refreshing scent mingling with the chocolate in the air. He loved chocolate and peppermint tea, I mused, a worried smile playing on my lips. At least, he did the last time I saw him. But it's been so long. My heart ached with the weight of lost time, wondering if my little boy had changed as much as the world around us. The moment I pulled the cake from the oven, its warmth radiating through my worn oven mitts, the doorbell shattered the silence of my home. He's here, I thought, my pulse quickening. It must be my grandson. I rushed to the door, my arthritis forgotten in the excitement of the moment. As I swung it open, there stood Andrew, taller than I remembered, a smile brightening his youthful face. "Grandma Teresa, I've missed you so much," he exclaimed, enveloping me in an embrace that smelled of youth and promise. I wrapped him in a tight hug, pouring years of longing into that single moment. "My darling boy, you've grown so much," I cried, stepping back to drink in the sight of him. "Let me look at you. You're so handsome and tall, looking more and more like your father," I marveled, my eyes misty with unshed tears. A torrent of questions spilled from my lips, each one a testament to the joy overflowing in my heart. I asked about his journey, his parents, his studies, and his school, desperate to bridge the gap that time had created between us. Andrew laughed, a sound that filled my home with warmth, as he stepped inside and set his backpack on the floor. He told me about his long journey, expressing his happiness at being here. He passed on greetings from his parents, assuring me they were well but busy with work. When he mentioned that school was going well, I felt a surge of pride for this young man who had grown up so fast. As he followed me to the kitchen, where the scent of cake still lingered, I saw his eyes light up like Christmas morning. "I've missed your chocolate cake so much, Grandma," he said, settling into a chair at the table. "It's the perfect cure for my homesickness." In that moment, surrounded by the familiar sense of home and the presence of my beloved grandson, I felt truly alive for the first time in years. As I settled back into my chair, I couldn't help but feel a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I cut Andrew a generous slice of cake and poured him a steaming cup of tea, my hands trembling slightly with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "You still like peppermint tea, don't you?" I asked, my voice tinged with uncertainty. His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds as he assured me that some things never change. He declared his eternal love for my peppermint tea, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. We continued talking, our conversation as lively as a spring garden in full bloom, sharing stories and laughter that bridged the years we'd been apart. After we finished our tea, Andrew excused himself to go to the living room and fetch his backpack. As he began unpacking, I saw his eyes scanning the room, searching for something familiar in a space that had changed more than I cared to admit. Suddenly, his voice cut through my reverie, asking about the old sewing machine that used to occupy the corner of the living room. He reminisced about all the things I used to make with it, his words stirring up memories that were both sweet and painful. I felt my smile falter, becoming brittle and forced, as I struggled to find the right words to explain its absence. I wondered if Andrew had noticed my strange behavior as he quietly headed to his room. Watching him look around the house, I felt a tightness in my chest. I couldn't imagine what he thought of my home, now that I had sold off the potted plants, paintings, and even the coffee table from the living room. Seeing Andrew stare at the empty corners, I knew he sensed something was off. But he seemed to shake it off and started unpacking his bags. After a while, I heard Andrew come to the kitchen. He must have been thirsty. I held my breath as I heard him open the refrigerator. I hadn't been able to prepare any of the delicious surprises he might have been expecting. My heart aches imagining the look on his face when he saw the almost empty fridge. I can picture him taking a step back in surprise. Should I explain everything to Andrew now? Or should I wait a little longer? The worry and confusion etched on Andrew's face as he asked me if everything was all right. He noticed the house looked different. The refrigerator was nearly empty, and I could see the concern in his eyes. My heart raced as I tried to conjure up a smile, my voice trembling slightly as I quickly assured him everything was fine. I told him I was just trying not to accumulate too many things, and that I didn't need much in the fridge these days. But oh, how I hated lying to my precious grandson. The tension in my voice must have been palpable, and I saw Andrew's brow furrow as he sensed something was amiss. I was grateful when he didn't press the issue, choosing instead to simply enjoy our time together. As the day wore on, I found myself in the kitchen, preparing a simple soup for dinner with the limited ingredients I had on hand. Despite the meager offerings in my pantry, I poured all my love and dedication into that pot, just as I always had. When Andrew took his first spoonful, his face lit up with a genuine smile that warmed my heart. He praised the soup, calling it incredibly delicious and reminding me that I was a wonderful cook. A wave of happiness washed over me at his words, and I felt my worries momentarily fade away. I told him there was nothing that made me happier than cooking for him, and seeing him enjoy his meal was all I needed. As we exchanged smiles and gratitude, I noticed Andrew's gaze lingering on the necklace around my neck. It was a beautiful and valuable piece that I always wore, though I realized he didn't know its history. His curiosity piqued, and he took advantage of our cozy atmosphere to ask about it. I felt a surge of emotion as I began to tell him the story of how his grandfather had given it to me. With a nostalgic smile, I recounted our beach trip when we were young, how his grandfather had stopped me suddenly, claiming he'd found something buried in the sand. He called it a gift from the sea to me, and as I spoke, I could almost feel the warmth of that long-ago sun and the touch of his hand in mine. I remember the moment his grandfather gave me this necklace. The surprise and disbelief I felt when he first clasped it around my neck were overwhelming. After that moment, I never had the courage to take it off, as if removing it would break the spell of that magical day. As I shared the story with Andrew, I could see the fascination in his eyes, hanging on every word. I imagined him picturing my young, surprised face, lit up with joy at receiving such an unexpected and precious gift. It was like opening a window to a time he had never known, a moment of pure and simple love between his grandparents. But then, I saw a small doubt creep into his expression. He asked if it wasn't strange that such a valuable necklace would simply be found in the sand, saying it sounded like a fairy tale. I couldn't help but smile softly at his question, taking a moment to consider it before answering. I told him I understood why he might think that, admitting that I had wondered the same thing many times over the years. But your grandfather, Richard, was an honest man, I explained. He had no reason to lie about something like that. To be frank, I couldn't imagine any other way he could have gotten such a wonderful gift. As I spoke about Richard, I felt that familiar warmth in my heart, and I saw Andrew studying my face. I think he noticed the sparkle in my eyes when I talked about his grandfather, and he realized I was telling the truth. He couldn't find another explanation, and I don't think he had the heart to doubt someone I had loved so much. Andrew agreed with me then, saying the story was incredibly wonderful. He added that what really mattered was the love we shared, and that the necklace was a beautiful symbol of that. His words were accompanied by a touching smile that warmed my old heart. I looked at my grandson with gratitude for his understanding. Yes, my dear, I said, that's exactly right. The real treasure is the love your grandfather and I shared. This necklace always reminds me of how lucky I was to have him in my life. Even after all we had discussed, I could see that Andrew's curiosity wasn't fully satisfied. I noticed his thoughts turning to his grandfather, a figure he knew little about. It occurred to me that no one had really talked much about Richard, and I felt a pang of guilt at that realization. As Andrew asked about his grandfather Richard, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I smiled gently, diving back into my memories of the wonderful man I had loved so dearly. "Oh, your grandfather Richard was an extraordinary man," I began, feeling my heart swell with pride and love. I told Andrew about Richard's inner strength, a quiet force that was matched only by his rare kindness. "He was incredibly compassionate," I explained, always putting our family's happiness first. I could still see Richard's warm smile in my mind's eye, the way he'd light up a room just by walking in. When it came to his work, I admitted that I didn't know much about the specifics of what he did at the bank. Maybe he thought I wouldn't understand, or perhaps he just didn't want to bring work worries home. I paused for a moment, lost in thought, before continuing. "You know, Andrew," I said, "I might not have understood much about his job, but I knew he always worked hard." I explained that we were always a simple family, not having much in the way of luxuries, but never wanting for anything either. There was always food on the table and love in our home, and that was what mattered most. I told Andrew about Richard's special gift for making small things seem grand, how life always felt full of joy when he was around. As I spoke, I could see Andrew listening intently, trying to picture the grandfather he never knew. I imagined he was envisioning a man who balanced strength and sensitivity, work and family, with an almost magical ability. When Andrew said that Richard sounded like an amazing person and that he wished he could have met him, I felt a bittersweet pang in my heart. I could sense the curiosity about his grandfather Richard wasn't fully satisfied, but I also saw that Andrew recognized the emotional weight this conversation held for me. Each shared story was a treasure, but Andrew seemed to understand that they also came with a great deal of nostalgia. I appreciated his respect for my feelings as he allowed the conversation to naturally come to an end without pressing for more information. The weeks that followed were a string of happy, simple days, each moment bringing great peace and comfort to both grandmother and grandson. There were many joyful times, but one day, our routine was interrupted. I was in the quiet kitchen, preparing lunch, when I opened the pantry to look for ingredients and found the shelves nearly bare. A slight look of worry crossed my face, but I steeled myself, thinking, well, this won't be a problem. I was determined not to let this small setback ruin the wonderful time I was having with Andrew. "I have enough money to buy at least the basics from the market," I thought to myself, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "And getting out of the house might do us both some good." With that decision made, I retreated to my room to fetch my small purse, its worn leather a testament to years of careful budgeting. I then made my way to Andrew's room, my heart light with the prospect of spending time with my grandson. I knocked gently on his door, my voice carefully modulated to hide any hint of worry as I invited him to join me at the market. Andrew's surprised but eager response warmed my heart, his playful smile reminding me so much of his grandfather. As we set out, the morning held the promise of a simple day filled with small errands and pleasant companionship. But that serene feeling was about to be shattered. We passed by Raymond's house, the owner of the place I was renting. There he stood, tall and gaunt, sipping his coffee and surveying the street like a hawk watching for prey. I felt my body tense as Andrew, unaware of my discomfort, raised his hand in a friendly greeting. Panic surged through me, and I quickly grabbed his hand midair, urging him to walk faster. I mumbled something about hurrying back for lunch, my voice betraying my fear despite my efforts to hide it. I could sense Andrew's confusion, his curious glance over his shoulder only increasing my anxiety. Raymond's intense gaze followed us, filled with an unsettling mix of evaluation and expectation. When Andrew asked what was wrong, his voice laced with growing concern, I felt my heart constrict. I kept my eyes forward, my voice suddenly firm as I insisted it was nothing, that we just needed to hurry. I could tell my firm tone had stopped Andrew from asking any more questions, but bless his heart, I knew it was eating at him. As we walked to the market, the silence between us was as thick as pea soup. Oh, if only I could explain everything to him without breaking his heart. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of his old grandma's strange behavior. Back in my day, we didn't burden the young ones with our troubles, but times have changed, haven't they? The trip to the market felt like it took an eternity, with Andrew lost in his thoughts and me wrestling with my conscience. When we finally got back home, Andrew retreated to his room. I imagined him lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind working overtime to piece together this puzzle. He's always been too smart for his own good, just like his grandfather. I knew he must have noticed the missing items around the house, things I'd had to part with to keep a roof over our heads. And my reaction to Raymond earlier? Well, that was a doozy, wasn't it? I could almost see the wheels turning in Andrew's head, putting two and two together. He's probably figured out I'm having trouble with the rent. Oh, how I wish I could shield him from all this worry. I wondered if he'd guessed I'd been selling things to make ends meet. The thought of him worrying about me made my heart ache something fierce. Why didn't I just tell him and the family? Pride is a heavy burden to bear, isn't it? I was lost in these thoughts when suddenly, the doorbell rang, shattering the silence like a hammer on glass. My heart leaped into my throat, and I'm sure Andrew could hear me rushing to the door, my footsteps betraying my fear and tension. Please, Lord, don't let it be Raymond. Not now, not with Andrew here. As I opened the door, I felt my face tighten with tension, but I tried my best to maintain a calm demeanor. Hello, Raymond, I said, my voice betraying a slight tremor despite my efforts to keep it steady. Raymond's serious expression and curt tone sent a chill down my spine as he got straight to the point about the rent. He reminded me that I'd been behind for several months, and his words felt like a heavy weight on my chest. I swallowed hard, desperately searching for a way to explain the situation without revealing the depth of my troubles. I understand, Raymond, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I apologized for the delay, trying to convey the difficulty of my current circumstances without sounding like I was making excuses. I asked for a little more time, my words tinged with a desperation I couldn't quite hide. Raymond's crossed arms and impatient stance told me he was at the end of his rope. His response about understanding everyone has difficulties felt hollow, and his question about what guarantee he had that things would change this time cut me to the quick. I took a deep breath, willing my voice to remain steady as I promised to have some money within a week. I mentioned Andrew's visit, hoping that invoking family might soften Raymond's stance. I have nowhere else to go, Raymond, I pleaded, my voice cracking slightly. This has been my home for years. Our discussion continued, each word feeling like a battle as I sought understanding and Raymond insisted on the importance of fulfilling obligations. Finally, after what felt like hours of tense conversation, Raymond sighed, clearly dissatisfied, but conceded. As Raymond left, I closed the door slowly, my heart heavy despite the temporary relief of a one-week reprieve. The threat of eviction shook me to my core, and I collapsed onto the old sofa in the living room. My whole body trembled with the effort of holding back my emotions, like a dam about to burst. Tears spilled from the corners of my eyes, leaving tracks of despair and fear on my face. I tried to take deep breaths, searching for a moment of calm in the whirlwind of my thoughts, but the conversation with Raymond kept swirling in my mind, forcing me to confront the harsh reality once again. When Andrew appeared in the living room, his gentle voice filled with worry and a desire to comfort me, I felt my last defenses crumble. For a moment, I considered continuing to hide the truth, but the loving presence of my grandson broke through my final resistance. My dear child, I began, my voice quivering like a leaf in the wind, I haven't been able to pay the rent. That's my problem. I haven't been able to keep up with the debt for several months now. I paused, swallowing hard before continuing. I've tried everything, my love. I kept trying to sell embroidery and sweets and savory snacks, but nothing was enough. The words felt like they were being torn from my throat as I admitted, when things got really tough, I started selling things from the house. Sometimes, I was so desperate, I even gave them directly to Raymond as partial payment. But that only made my situation worse. I looked into Andrew's eyes, seeing the shock and concern there, and it broke my heart all over again. Now, he's given me 1 week. If I can't repay the debt, I'll be evicted, I finished, each word feeling like a nail in the coffin of the life I'd known. Andrew sat next to me, trying his best to stay calm and collected, though I could see he wanted to cry with me. He asked about the necklace Richard had given me, his voice trembling as he inquired if it was really as valuable as I'd said. I sighed deeply, feeling a mix of pain and determination in my eyes. Yes, I told him, the necklace is worth enough to pay off the entire debt. In fact, it's worth more than that. My voice caught as I continued, but it's the only thing I have left from your grandfather. It's the only physical reminder of the love of my life. I just can't do it, Andrew. I simply can't let it go. I'd rather lose the house than lose this last piece of him. As I made this confession, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of my quiet sobs. I could see that even though Andrew was young, he understood the magnitude of my decision. This wasn't just another household item, it was something of immeasurable value. When Andrew suggested contacting his parents about the situation, I felt a jolt of fear run through me. I shook my head vigorously, feeling panic rise in my chest. No, Andrew. We can't do that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to burden your mother and father with my problems. They have their own worries, and I can't bear the thought of being a burden to them. But Andrew, bless his heart, wasn't giving up. He insisted that's what family is for, to help each other. He said his parents would be upset if they knew I was trying to handle all of this on my own. Andrew's frustration grew as he insisted we should seek help from the family. His words rang in my ears, telling me it wasn't about being a burden, but about caring for each other. He was so certain they would want to help. I sighed deeply, feeling the pain on my face intensify. I know they would want to help, my dear, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But this is also about pride. I've tried so hard to be independent all my life. I've taken care of myself and my family. Accepting help now, admitting failure, it's just so difficult for me. Andrew's voice was filled with passion and concern as he argued that asking for help when needed wasn't a failure, but a strength. He said it was better than losing the house or selling Richard's necklace. Then he asked me a question that pierced my heart. Wouldn't Richard want me to be safe and happy, even if it meant selling his gift? I looked at Andrew, feeling tears well up in my eyes again. Maybe you're right, Andrew, I admitted, my voice cracking. Maybe Richard would think that way. But I need to try everything else first. I need to feel like I've done all I can. When Andrew asked me to promise that I'd let them help if things got really bad, I felt my resolve weakening. I nodded slowly, finally conceding a little. If it comes to that, I'll consider asking for help, I said. But for now, please let me try to solve this my way. Please. Andrew sighed, and I could see the weight on his young shoulders. He agreed, but I could tell he was going to keep a close eye on the situation.
As the conversation came to an end, Andrew made a quiet promise to himself. He was determined to do whatever was necessary to protect Teresa, even if it meant going against her wishes. Andrew forced an affectionate smile and kissed his grandmother's forehead, a silent expression of love. He offered to make some tea, suggesting they both needed to relax and that a warm drink might help. As he headed to the kitchen, he left Teresa alone with her thoughts in the living room. While boiling the water, Andrew became lost in his own thoughts. He debated whether to call his parents immediately, but the persistent idea made him uneasy. He couldn't ignore his grandmother's request, as she had trusted him with her troubles. Andrew found himself torn between respecting Teresa's wishes and trying to prevent her suffering from continuing. This internal conflict created a significant dilemma for him. He considered helping her sell something as a temporary solution but worried it might not be enough. The idea of staying and working to help pay off the debt crossed his mind. Each option presented its own challenges and uncertainties. Andrew knew that any choice he made might require significant sacrifices and dramatic changes in his own life. However, his concern for his grandmother's happiness outweighed any thoughts about himself. After several minutes of contemplation, Andrew made a decision. Driven by a mixture of youthful determination and unconditional love for his grandmother, he resolved to take immediate action. The decision became clear and unshakable in his mind. He planned to speak directly with Raymond after breakfast, hoping that if he understood their situation, he might grant them more time or at least be more flexible about the payments. As Andrew prepared the tea, his resolve was evident in his demeanor. Andrew's every movement reflected his determination to face the problem head-on. This was not just about saving a house, it was about honoring his grandmother's legacy of struggle and dignity. He resolved to act carefully and respectfully, but he was determined not to let Raymond continue to threaten or leave his grandmother in despair. Andrew believed Teresa deserved peace and no more stress. After breakfast, Andrew told his grandmother he was going for a walk, concealing his true intentions. Despite the weight of worry, his determination to resolve Teresa's situation drove him forward. Arriving at the neighbor's house, he took a deep breath before knocking, summoning all his courage. Raymond answered with a stern expression, his tone irritated as he asked what Andrew wanted so early in the morning. Andrew, maintaining a calm and confident voice despite the cold reception, began by saying he knew about his grandmother's rent situation and wanted to discuss possible solutions to prevent her from losing her home. Raymond responded with great disdain, questioning whether a child like Andrew really thought he could make a difference by intruding on adult conversations. He emphasized that this was about money, not goodwill or promises, and that Andrew's angelic face wouldn't be of any use. Andrew persisted, offering to work and help with anything necessary in exchange for paying off the debt. He pleaded with Raymond, expressing his desire not to see his grandmother lose her home. Fear began to mix with determination in Andrew's voice as he insisted there must be something that could be done, some way to help, some solution. Raymond sighed, clearly irritated by the boy's persistence. He told Andrew bluntly that there was nothing he could do, and that paying the debt was the only option. Raymond emphasized that Andrew's grandmother had accumulated months of unpaid rent, and that fine words or offers of child labor wouldn't change anything. The argument dragged on, with Andrew becoming increasingly desperate to persuade Raymond to consider his offer, while Raymond reinforced his position, his patience wearing thin by the second. Raymond concluded by reiterating that the only way to resolve this was to pay the debt in full. He warned Andrew not to waste any more time, reminding him that he and his grandmother only had a week left. With that, Raymond slammed the door shut, leaving Andrew alone with his frustration and sadness. Andrew walked away, keenly aware of the weight of his failure. He fought back tears, thinking he had truly believed he could help, that he could save the house and prevent the eviction. Raymond's harsh words had shattered his hope, forcing the boy to face the painful reality that perhaps there was nothing he could do. With this sad realization, Andrew decided to return to his room and spend the day trying to distract himself from his sorrowful thoughts. In the days following Andrew's visit to Raymond, the tension in the house was intense. Despite Teresa and her grandson's efforts to keep their spirits up, the fear of losing their home prevented them from finding the same peace they had before. However, their misfortune was about to change. A few days later, as Andrew was watching TV in the living room, the doorbell suddenly rang. Anxiety immediately sprouted within the boy, but he quickly got up to answer it. He called out to his grandmother, trying to keep his voice steady, saying he'd get the door. When Andrew opened it, he saw Raymond's face wearing an expression he couldn't immediately decipher. Raymond seemed less irritated than before, but there was still a sternness in his eyes. He said he wanted to talk to Teresa, his tone of voice indicating a certain discomfort. Teresa shuddered upon hearing Raymond's voice but mustered her courage and appeared in the living room.
As I heard Raymond's voice, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Mustering all the courage I had, I stepped into the living room, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "What do you want, Raymond?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the hesitation clear in every syllable. Raymond entered, and I couldn't help but notice his posture was a bit more relaxed than before. I saw Andrew notice it too, and for a moment, I dared to hope. Raymond began to speak, and I could hardly believe my ears. He told me he'd been thinking about our situation and had decided to give us a longer deadline for the rent payment. I could see the discomfort on his face as he said this, as if his own generosity was causing him pain. But then he added a condition: he wanted something in return to compensate for some of the value. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief, surprise, and a touch of anxiety all mixed together. I fought back tears as I thanked him, each word filled with gratitude. "Oh, Raymond, I don't know how to thank you. This means so much to me," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Still, the mention of compensation brought the tension right back. The reality of my dire financial situation never seemed to give me a moment's rest. After a moment's thought, I remembered something I could offer. "I have a beautiful set of teacups in the basement," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're not valuable, but they're good quality and should be worth something." My voice was firm, but I knew Andrew could sense my reluctance to part with yet another cherished possession. It felt like I was selling off pieces of my life, one item at a time. Raymond nodded, and I took it as a gesture of approval. I turned to look at my grandson, my eyes conveying a mix of relief and sadness. "Andrew, would you help Raymond find the teacups in the basement?" I asked, watching as he obediently accompanied our neighbor.
Andrew and Raymond descended into the basement, a space filled with dusty boxes and overflowing shelves. It was a chaos of old possessions and junk. Raymond, clearly impatient with the task before them, quickly expressed his dissatisfaction. He muttered about the mess, saying it would take forever to find a simple tea set, his eyes scanning the surroundings with an air of displeasure. His irritation began to wear on Andrew's patience. The boy tried to focus on the job rather than Raymond's attitude, and started examining one of the shelves, moving boxes and pushing items aside. After considerable time, his eyes caught something interesting among Teresa's clutter. It was a jewelry box, old and large, hidden in the mess. It was beautiful, with small shimmering stones elegantly decorating its design. Andrew exclaimed, unable to hide the wonder in his voice, showing Raymond the jewelry box and saying he'd never seen anything like it. Raymond quickly approached upon hearing Andrew's comment, a flash of interest crossing his eyes. Andrew thought he saw surprise on the man's face, but it was only for a moment. He quickly displayed complete indifference. Raymond said it was pretty but doubted the teacups were inside, taking the box from the boy's hands with unnecessary force. Without giving Andrew a chance to object, he placed the object on a high shelf, out of the young man's reach. He then told Andrew not to dawdle and to hurry so they could get out of there. Andrew was angry at how Raymond handled the jewelry box in his impatience, but knew arguing would not help. He tried to maintain his composure and continued the search. Andrew's curiosity about the jewelry box persisted, the desire to know its contents refusing to fade. He refocused on finding the tea set, finally locating it after a prolonged search. Raymond promptly left with the tea set, bringing a semblance of peace back to Teresa and Andrew. However, Andrew's mind remained preoccupied with the mysterious jewelry box from the basement. Throughout the day, he found himself distracted, his imagination running wild with speculations about its contents. He wondered if it might contain something valuable, noting it had seemed too heavy to be empty. As night fell, Andrew's restlessness intensified. He tossed and turned in bed, the darkness of his room seeming to amplify his thoughts about the jewelry box. He tried to convince himself to wait until morning to ask Teresa about it, but his curiosity proved too strong an opponent. Eventually succumbing to impulse, Andrew decided to act. He reasoned that he wouldn't be able to sleep anyway and that taking a quick look couldn't hurt. Rising from his bed, he crept down to the basement with utmost caution and silence. Arriving at his destination, Andrew turned on the light and located the shelf where Raymond had placed the jewelry box. With determination, he dragged a chair over, a mix of anxiety and excitement for the unknown coursing through him. Carefully climbing onto the chair, he reached for the box on the shelf. Andrew gently retrieved the jewelry box and descended from the chair with his treasure in hand. He sat on the cold basement floor, his heart racing with anticipation. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," Andrew whispered to the box, as if it could respond. Finally, he cautiously opened the lid. In that moment, the boy froze. His breath caught, his jaw dropped, and his eyes widened in astonishment. There was a dazzling sight awaiting inside. Jewels of every shape and size sparkled brilliantly. Beautiful and magnificent necklaces, rings, and earrings, worth millions, were all there. And on top of these treasures was an envelope. Andrew whispered to himself, "This can't be real. I must be dreaming. I must have fallen asleep without realizing it." Shock overwhelmed his emotions. He noticed that the small stones decorating the outside of the box were actually tiny fragments of real diamonds. The weight of the discovery pressed heavily on his chest. The joy of the beauty and value of the discovery mixed with a sudden sense of responsibility about what to do next. He hesitated as he picked up the envelope. He considered opening it but was afraid. The letter was signed by his grandfather's name. So, he wondered, would this be invading their privacy? Did he have the right to open it? Shouldn't he respect the memory of his grandfather and the love his grandmother had for him? Yet, the letter might contain crucial information about the treasure. His curiosity and the urgent need to help his grandmother in their difficult financial situation outweighed any doubts. With a deep sigh, Andrew made up his mind. "If this can help Grandma, I need to know what it says," he concluded, justifying his actions with the hope that the letter would describe the treasure and offer a solution to all their problems. He carefully opened the envelope and read the letter inside. The letter read, "Dear Teresa, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. I want you to know that each piece of this collection now belongs to you. Each gem stored here symbolizes my love and my wish to always protect you. I hid and stored this box in the basement. It is meant to give you a reason to move forward and ensure that you lack for nothing when I am gone. I entrust Raymond to be the guardian of this secret, and he promised to give you this beautiful little box after my funeral. These jewels have been passed down through my family for generations, from father to child. Some of the jewels were lost along the way, so don't worry if you need to sell them to survive. And about that necklace. By now, you figured out that it didn't come from the sand on the beach. While I am alive, this little box will remain hidden in our basement. But once you receive it, I hope you will continue to be as kind and loving as you always have been. Hold your head high and move forward while seeking your own happiness. These are my final words. I wrote this before I departed. Stay well, my dear. Know that I am always with you. Always. With deep love, from your beloved Richard." Reading the letter, Andrew was instantly enveloped in a mix of emotions. The contents revealed a story he had never imagined. It was an inheritance of love and care planned for Teresa. The discovery that Raymond knew about this inheritance and chose to keep it secret only deepened Andrew's emotional turmoil. Why did he do this? Why didn't he talk about the inheritance? That monster, Andrew thought, his hands trembling. The thought that Raymond was trusted to protect this inheritance after Richard's death, and that this trust was betrayed, formed a lump in Andrew's throat. How could someone be so cruel? Perhaps he wanted to drive Grandma out and get his hands on this. Anger began to swell within him. It was directed at Raymond's greed and dishonesty. How could he do such a thing? To watch an innocent woman suffer and pretend not to know, Andrew quietly questioned. Disappointment and outrage mixed with astonishment at Richard's noble actions. The letter was more than just a message. It was proof of Richard's determination to secure Teresa's happiness. It was a promise of eternal protection that Raymond chose to ignore for selfish reasons. After the sudden shock and amazement of finding the jewels and the letter in the basement, Andrew fell into a deep state of reflection. The revelation of Raymond's true nature, combined with the legacy of love and care left by Richard, sparked a strong resolve within Andrew. I can't forgive Raymond, he thought, feeling a mix of anger and determination. But I need to wait for the right moment, until I can show everyone who he really is. Days passed, each one offering no special opportunity to act. He tried to stay busy, but anxiety and anticipation about confronting Raymond occupied most of his thoughts.
One sweltering afternoon, Andrew was trying to distract himself from the boredom when the doorbell rang, cutting through the heavy air like a knife. I heard him perk up, his attention immediately drawn to the sound outside the room. As I opened the door, I was met with Raymond's expression, a familiar mix of impatience and determination that made my heart sink. He wasted no time on formalities, getting straight to the point. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to pay at least half of the overdue rent by the end of the day, or we'd have to be out by early the next morning. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, a wave of despair washing over me with such force I could barely breathe. Please, Raymond, I begged, my voice quivering with the raw emotion of someone on the brink of ruin. Just a little more time. I'm doing my best to gather the money. Isn't there some way we can come to an agreement? I have nowhere else to go. I saw Raymond sigh, his irritation giving way to fatigue for just a moment. He told me he understood I was in a difficult situation, but he had his own obligations. He reminded me that he'd already extended the deadline multiple times, that the rent was my responsibility, and that I should have known the consequences when I signed the lease. His words were like daggers to my heart, each one reminding me of my failure to provide for myself and Andrew. But there must be something we can do, I pleaded, grasping at straws. Some solution that benefits us both. I can't believe making us homeless is the only option. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I thought of Richard, my dear husband who would have never let this happen if he could have prevented it. You knew Richard, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You know he would never have allowed this to happen if he could have prevented it. As I stood there, pleading with Raymond, I could feel Andrew's presence behind me, growing stronger with each passing moment. I was trying to appeal to any shred of compassion Raymond might have left, reminding him of the history and connections our families had shared over the years. Suddenly, Andrew burst into the living room, interrupting our heated discussion. His voice was filled with a certainty I'd never heard before as he declared that there was indeed a solution to all of this, and that Raymond knew it well. I watched as Raymond's reaction was immediate and visible. The man who had been so unyielding just moments ago now seemed to shrink before my eyes. A flash of fear crossed his face, and he looked at Andrew with an almost pleading expression. I was confused by this sudden shift in the atmosphere, my gaze darting between Andrew and Raymond as I tried to make sense of what was happening. What are you talking about, Andrew? I asked, my voice a mix of hope and fear for the answer. Raymond desperately tried to regain control of the situation. He claimed not to know what Andrew was talking about, dismissing him as just a child trying to distract from the real issue at hand. But I could hear a tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. Andrew, however, wasn't intimidated. He insisted that this wasn't a distraction, that Raymond knew exactly where the solution to our problems lay. I watched in astonishment as my grandson stared down this grown man with a determination that belied his years. As Andrew's anger grew and his voice rose, I felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride in his courage to stand up for us, and fear of what this confrontation might lead to. I wanted to intervene, to protect Andrew from whatever was unfolding, but I also sensed that he knew something important. Something that could change everything. As I listened to Andrew's accusation, I felt like I was watching a play unfold, one where I didn't know my lines. The tension in the room was palpable, like a thick fog settling around us. I turned to Andrew, my confusion evident in my voice as I pleaded with him to explain what was happening. My words came out in a trembling whisper, fear and anticipation mingling in my chest. I watched as Raymond's demeanor changed completely. The authoritative man who had been threatening us just moments ago now looked defeated, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. When he began to speak, his voice was barely audible, thick with regret. He confirmed that Andrew was right, that he knew something that could help us, but it wasn't about today, it was about something that happened years ago. As Raymond began his confession, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into a new reality. Every word he spoke felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was trying to solve. He spoke of letters and a jewelry box, things I hadn't even known existed until that moment. I listened carefully, my mind racing to connect the dots, to understand how this revelation related to our current situation. Throughout his confession, Raymond couldn't meet my eyes. He looked like a man expecting the worst: anger, rejection, perhaps even hatred. But as he finished his story, leaving out the contents of the jewelry box, I felt something unexpected wash over me. It wasn't anger or betrayal, as one might expect. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm, as if a long-standing question had finally been answered. I thought back to all the times I had struggled, all the moments I had felt lost and alone since Richard's passing. And now, here was Raymond, confessing to something that could change everything. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I knew that my response would shape not just my future, but Andrew's as well. As I looked at Raymond, I saw not just our neighbor, but a man burdened by years of guilt. And in that moment, I made a decision that would surprise us all. The room felt charged with an energy I couldn't quite name, a strange mix of tension and anticipation. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of struggle and uncertainty lifting from my shoulders. My voice was calm when I finally spoke, surprising even myself. I told Raymond that while I understood what he had done was wrong, and the pain it had caused couldn't be ignored, living in bitterness and resentment wouldn't bring Richard back or erase the mistakes that had been made. As I continued, I could feel a quiet strength in my words, one that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside me. I explained that we all make mistakes, and what matters is how we choose to move forward. I chose forgiveness, I said, because that's what Richard would have wanted. He always believed in the best in people, even Raymond. The relief on Raymond's face was palpable, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His voice was thick with emotion as he thanked me, saying my forgiveness meant more than he could express. I just smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. Then, my curiosity got the better of me, and I asked about the real contents of the box. Raymond's smile was tinged with regret as he finally admitted the truth. "It's jewels, Teresa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jewels that Richard had been collecting for you." Raymond revealed the truth about the jewels. His words hit me like a thunderbolt, sending shockwaves through my entire being. Jewels? I heard myself say, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard did that for me? A storm of emotions raged within me, surprise, disbelief, and just a touch of joy at the memory of love those jewels represented. It was as if Richard was reaching out to me from beyond, still trying to take care of me even after all these years. The revelation was almost too much to bear. I felt the room start to spin, the faces of Andrew and Raymond blurring before my eyes. Then, everything went black. I came to moments later, cradled in Andrew's arms, his young face etched with concern. As I regained my senses, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if the shock had cleared away all the cobwebs of doubt and fear that had been clouding my mind for so long. In that moment, I saw our situation with startling clarity. Yes, we had been through hard times, but we weren't alone. Richard's love was still with us, manifested in those precious stones he'd so carefully collected. And Andrew, my dear grandson, had shown a strength and wisdom beyond his years. As the days passed, our life in the house began to find its way back to normalcy. But it was a new kind of normal, one shaped by the series of events that had turned our seemingly hopeless situation into a story of strength and redemption.
Teresa's forgiveness of Raymond not only eased the burden of past hurts but opened a new chapter in the lives of all involved. Understanding and compassion replaced mistrust and resentment. The discovery of Richard's hidden jewels provided a solution to the overdue rent problem. One of the most valuable pieces was sold, covering the debt to Raymond and providing an opportunity for Teresa to keep her home. The sale not only covered the back rent but also gave Teresa some financial breathing room to begin rebuilding her life more securely. Raymond witnessed the power of forgiveness and the depth of love Teresa still held for Richard. This experience transformed him in ways he never expected, teaching him the importance of compassion. As a gesture of apology, he promised to be more understanding and patient with Teresa, not just with her, but in all aspects of his life. If you've been touched by Teresa and Andrew's journey, please show your support for our channel by giving this video a thumbs up. Share this video and leave a comment below to let us know what you thought of this story. If you'd like to hear more, click on the next exciting story that appears on your screen. Thank you for watching.